Professor Emmanuel Falque, thank you for joining me.
Okay, nice to be present with you.
You are going to speak at a big conference at St. Mary's called Revelation and Finitude, and the point of the conference is to introduce people to the dialogue between yourself and Professor William Desmond. So tell me a bit about your experience of reading William Desmond.
So, I just read William Desmond now. I never read him before. And so I read him because of the conference. And it was a very good surprise for me to read his book. And particularly his book Being and Between, because it is his very well-known book. I think we have many things in common, but we are a bit different. We have many differences too. The first one is perhaps that he is an Irish, and I am a French. So
That would be a
because
big difference.
this is a difference. It is a difference. First, because I read the dialogue between Richard Carney and William Desmond, and two Irish were speaking together. It's not the same when you will speak when it will be a French and an Irish. So it is a difference. And perhaps there is another difference. It's the fact that he discussed a lot with Hegel. And he disagreed with Hegel and dialectic, but he discussed a lot with Hegel, and I discussed a lot with Heidegger. But he said that Heidegger is very important for him, like for me, because of the necessity to come back to the question of being. I come back to the question of being too. But I think that it's not the same, because what is first in my work, it is the question of finitude. And I think that there is a gap between the question of finitude and between the question of the between. So I'm not sure that I could speak about metaxology in my work, you see, because the beginning
But
is
what do you
only
think? What do
finitude.
you mean by finitude?
Uh, For me, I use the Heideggerian concept of finitude. Not to say that it is the last word about finitude, but only to say that it is the beginning. I've said Foucault. Foucault said that the figure of the modern human being is finitude. And what is finitude? It is the origin of my death, I said Heidegger. And for everyone, if I am philosopher, there is nothing outside of my death. So for me, the finitude is not finite. The finitude is the horizon block of my life. And when you speak about finite, it is as if it was a part of the infinite. But the infinite is not the beginning for me. It doesn't mean that we don't need the infinite. But for me, the infinite is given only by God. That's why William spoke about creation. I completely agree with him. And we have to speak about creation. But for me, there is no creation outside of the new creation, which is resurrection. So I think that I cross the Rubicon. When I say I cross the Rubicon, it means that I can presuppose the question of the infinite in my first or in our first experience. You see, I think that there is a difference with William, because William Desmond is speaking about the question of between, and when you speak about between, suppose that you have two poles and you have finite and infinite. It's not the same way. There is no between in my work. There is no participation. There is no metaxology. The beginning of my work is more close to Aristotle and the question of contingency than close to Platon, for example. And for me, the theme of the conference is finitude and revelation. For me, revelation is given only by God. The revelation is the revelation of God. So it means that you have to cross the Rubicon. So perhaps I am a bit more theologian than William. More theologian because I don't know if he will agree with that, but because I speak about resurrection, Trinity, incarnation. And then when I speak about resurrection, Trinity, and incarnation, for example, I'm speaking in theology, but because the theology has the means to transform the philosophy. That's why the center of my work is not between. It is metamorphosis. It is transformation. I think that you can oppose on the way of William. It is between, and in my way it is transformation. So it means that the beginning is not the same. Because I think that in the work of William Desmond, the beginning is to be between God for example, and the world and human being, but for me it is only human being. So, and we are transformed by God only in the way of resurrection, of Christianity. So I think there is something different, but it doesn't mean that I am not a philosopher. I always said I am first a philosopher because I begin my work without God. But without God, it doesn't mean without God, with no God. It's not a negation of God. It is a big. I'm very close to Levinas, in fact, because Levinas in Totality and Infinity said that the first is that we are the world is created, and we are all atheists. Atheist, huh? You know you are a specialist of Levinas, so you know the word. So we are when Levinas said we are atheist, it doesn't mean that we are against God. It means that first we are in the world, because I try to find something in common between all the people, believers and no believers. Voilà. Because for me, you can't presuppose that all the people are believers or have to be believers. Perhaps you can be changed by the others. So I think that between the between and the finitude, the question of revelation, what is a revelation? Is a revelation given in philosophy too, or is a revelation given only by the revelation of God in the New Testament? On the Old Testament? I think there is a debate.
Why do you think this debate is important for philosophy of religion, for philosophical theology?
I think it's very important. First, I think it's important in a pastoral way. How to speak about God today. And the situation in France is not the same as in US, I think, because of secularization. So you know that in France, but it is like that in Europe, I don't know if it will change in US. I don't know exactly the situation in US. And the situation in Ireland, because he's Irish, what is the situation? But I think it's important. Why? Because now the people are not against God. The people are living without God. They don't speak out God anymore. Example in France, many people don't know nothing about God. So we are in a new situation. We're not in the Sartrean situation when the people were against God. Because when someone is against God, they are always speaking about God. So you can speak. But today it's more difficult. In France, if you speak about incarnation, Trinity, they know nothing. Many people know nothing. So I think that it is the first point, that it is very important in philosophy of religion to speak about religion, but not only from my own conviction. First, to find something in common, and what I call the human as short. In French, l'homme tout court. Okay, and then when we find something in common, the revelation can come. So for me, because perhaps I'm more Merleau-Pontian than an Heideggerian, this is my difference with Marion, Lacoste, and so on. I'm Merleau-Pontian. And what does it mean to be Merleau-Pontian? It means that I refuse what Merleau-Ponty said. He called that la transcendance de surplomb. It means that the revelation is coming, bang, and break everything. No, for me, the revelation is a sort of entailment. The revelation is coming in the horizon
Into
of our
life.
life. Well, interlife. Okay. So I think that the important point, it is a point of the debate, a pastoral point. Then there is a metaphysical point, and this is very important because William is coming back to metaphysics, and me too. Because now I've developed a lot, like the question of metaphysics. I wrote a book on Men de Biran about French spiritualism, as you know. So, but the question of metaphysics for me is not only metaphysics in the sense of the meta, which is up. For me, in Crossing the Rubicon, metaphysics is to go through the physics. Meta, to go through the physics in etymology. So, but this question of metaphysics is very important, and the question of being too. Now I just wrote a paper, just published, which is still being in Thomas Aquinas. So not God without being, but God with being. But what does it mean, being, for me? It means that, as said Heidegger, you have no being without beings. And I think it's exactly the same in Thomas Aquinas, because Thomas Aquinas is a thinker of limits for me, as a thinker of finitude, in fact. Because for Thomas Aquinas, he is always saying, for example, the Summa Theologiae, he's saying that we are made for the beatitude and so on, but we are living here. We are in via. And because we are in via, we have to begin by the word, where we are. It is the case for the proof, for example, the proof, the 5 ways to go to God. He said that the ontological argument of Anselmus, perhaps it is a good one, but it's not possible to practice this argument now, because we are here in the word. So I don't develop the argument. So we need, what do we need? We need the cosmological ways, the 5 ways, by the word. So you see that even in Thomas Aquinas, we have to begin with the word and not to presuppose the revelation. It is a bit the same in the contra gentiles. You know, in the contra gentiles, for me, I said that it is not a contra gentiles, it is a pro gentiles, a summa for gentiles. Because what does it mean at the beginning? At the beginning of the summa, for me, for gentiles, he said, I think you know it, at the beginning he said that we have something in common with the Jewish and the heretics. What do we have in common? With the Jewish, we have the Old Testament in common. And with the heretics, we have the New Testament in common. But what do we have in common with the Muslims and the pagans? He said no things. And it is because we have no scripture in common that we need to come back to the natural reason. You see that the natural reason is not only a way to reach God in a vertical way. The natural reason is a sort of workhorse to say, so I have no scripture, but I have the reason in common. It's exactly the same for me. The same way. Today, we don't have any scripture in common. In France, you can meet someone in your town and I will speak about you, about God. What does it mean? What are you speaking about? They don't know. So we have no scripture in common. So we have to find something in common. But today, what is in common? It is no reason anymore. It is finitude. Because as said Ricoeur, after les maîtres de soupçon, you know, Freud, Karl Marx.
The masters of suspicion.
Yeah, exactly. So after those 3, what is in common? Not the reason, but the finitude. You see? So I think that there is a question of pastoral, how to speak about God today. There is a question of metaphysics. What is the sense of metaphysics? Because William is speaking a lot about metaphysics. And there is a question of the thing we can have in common today. It's not enough to speak about God. We have to speak about a human being. And for me, a human being is a true human being. As you know, in the wedding feast of the Lamb, about the Eucharist, I spoke about animality. The animality in ourselves, with our passion, with our drives. And God is coming to transform our animality in humanity, in filiation. So that is a point. And just a point more, that I think that we have today to speak in theology from our experience, our own experience. That's why for me, there is no theology without philosophy. And perhaps phenomenological experience. And perhaps it will be a point to discuss with William, because I see that William spoke a lot about Hegel, the question of the between, and so on. But what about phenomenology? And phenomenology, it's not only Heidegger. Phenomenology is a way to come back to the lived experience. Because me, of course, I am first a phenomenologist. And what does it mean to be a phenomenologist? It means that I practice the reduction, epoche. And what is the reduction? It is to say that we have to put in bracket the things themselves to come back to my experience of the things. So the question is not, the question we have to ask today is not if God exists, but what experience of God we can have today. But you can't speak about the experience of God if you don't come back to his experience of human being.
So what do you think this conference can do for the future of philosophy of religion?
Okay, first, I think that it will be a confrontation, interesting confrontation. And we have, for me, you know that I wrote a book which is a loving struggle. So I will have a loving struggle with William Desmond, and not perhaps only with William, but a global struggle with the people who will speak about our work. Because I think that will not speak only on the work of me, William, or on my work, but I think that they will confront the two. I hope so. And in that way, because there is a big difference between the two, I think this loving struggle will be a debate, and we need to debate. And that is good for the future of philosophy of religion, to have a debate. Not only to repeat the same thing and to presuppose the same things. That is the first point. And the second point is to say that if we have two ways which are different, it doesn't mean that it is a complete opposition. It means that we don't have to oppose, but to see that there are two ways, and those two ways can be two manners to reach God. It is exactly like in Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas. Me, I did my PhD on Bonaventure, so I was completely Bonaventurean. And what does it mean to be Bonaventurean? It means to speak immediately about revelation. That's why Bonaventure in the Brevolucium said, we don't need proof of God, so absolutely against Thomas Aquinas. But now I became more Thomasian. Voilà, now. So that means that now,
Thomistic, yeah.
many years after, I said, perhaps it's not so easy to speak only about revelation. We need to go through the philosophy, but not to stay
Through the
only
finitude.
about finitude, yes. But finitude is a more Thomasian concept, in fact, than a Bonaventurean concept. The question is not the question of finitude. The question is, what is the beginning? What is the beginning of my discourse? God by the up, or human being by the below? And for me, it is the human being by the below, because God is coming on our way. It is like the disciple of Emmaus. You have two interpretations of the disciple of Emmaus. The one who is to say that, exactly the one developed by Jean-Luc Marion, is to say that all the interpretation is when they recognize Jesus at the moment when he broke the bread. But for me, it is the beginning. Those art, when
our hearts were burning within us.
Yeah, voilà. Yeah. So you see, what is the beginning? Is it the end of the story or the beginning of the story? For me, it is the beginning of the story. Well, so two different ways, but I think that they are not in opposition. And the question, and for me, of course, there is, I saw that William spoke a lot about the question of creation, that is very important, and the question of aesthetics, that is very important. But for me, there is also the question of the flesh, of the body. Because what is first in my philosophical work, it is the traumatic experience, the extra phenomenon, which is not the infra-phenomenal and the supra-phenomenal. So for me, I am a tragical thinker, as William, because William spoke a lot about Hamlet and the tragic, but the tragic for me is more the psychiatric tragedy. So the extra phenomenon is very important. And I wrote a book, The Flesh of God. It will be published for the conference. In that book, I spoke about God extra phenomenon. It means God who is coming in our trauma the day of the Holy Saturday. Okay, and I saw that William, he wrote a book about God in between, exactly like me. He wrote a book, Being in Between and God in Between, and me, I wrote a book, The Extra Phenomenon and God in Extra Phenomenon. So we are at the same, methodologically, we are in the same way. We speak about philosophy and then what God is doing. But for me, God is coming to transform, not only to be with, but to transform. And for example, in the question of the trauma, I developed 5 trauma: sickness, separation, death of a child, a natural disaster, and pandemic. And I said that in those situations, I'm completely alone. I spoke about the original solitude. I'm completely alone. and the other is only near me, beside me, next to me. But nobody can be with you in a sickness, you have a cancer. Nobody can be with you if you lost a child. And then, in the case of God extra-feminine, only God can be with. Because he resurrected. It's not me who is living, but the Christ is living in me. So it means that God changed everything in my life, and it's absolutely not dialectical. If it is dialectical, it's just a transformation. And I agree with William when we said he spoke a lot about the question of capacities. And for me, we have to become. You have to be who you become. Sois qui tu deviens, and not to become who you be. So it means that it's not pandar. Huh? Be who you become. One of my students just finished a PhD. We have the defense last week. It was exactly the title of his PhD. Be who you become, about Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Heidegger. And be who you become, it is that is the sense. And the question of body, for me, is very important. The question of the spirit body, between the extended body of Descartes and the lived body of Husserl. We have to come back to the question of the body. Because Christ became flesh. Voilà. Mais flesh is not only lived body like in phenomenology. Flesh, it is true flesh. Said Tertullian. He assumed he was like us, with hair like us, with bones like us, and so on. So it is not only lived body. That's a very important point in my work too. On that point, I don't know. I don't see if William is speaking a lot about the question of the body. He spoke a lot about the question of the metaphysics, but I think that our methods are very close. They are close because we try to connect philosophy and theology, but I think that the way are very different, because the beginning of my way is finitude, and the beginning of his way is more the question of the infinite, I think, to be between.
Professor Falque, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was a good discussion.
And we look forward to welcoming you to St. Mary's Seminary University in May of 27.
Okay, see you soon.